There's different technologies out there, but you can print metal in a precise powder. It's called laser powder bed fusion is actually one of the most precise ways of manufacturing in 3D with printing. And you could print in metal, and it could be this like the thickness of your hair, or like a third of the thickness of a hair in any direction for a certain volume, like 3 meters or so, 3 feet or so. You could get very precise prints. So that's really kind of what fascinated me. I worked for a company called EOS for 5 years before the pandemic, and was even involved with their founder, and worked a lot with what's going on to build the industry, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's too expensive. You can do it other ways besides printing."
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, Jampo Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we're excited to have Adam J. Penna with us. Adam is a seasoned pro in advanced manufacturing and 3D printing with a career that spanned over 2 decades. In fact, gentlemen, if you look beside him, he has a 3D printer, and I got the old boring 2D one.
Oh, geez.
And
Yeah.
he's here to talk about the latest innovations in the manufacturing world, how digital content is shaking things up, and what's next for this ever evolving world. How digital. So grab a seat and get ready for some fascinating insights into how manufacturing is transforming and what it means for all of us. Adam, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, John Paul. Great to be here, man. Great to be here.
You've been in the game for over 20 years, man. That's 2 decades. Any standout moments that you think made you fell in love with manufacturing?
Ooh, yeah, falling in love with manufacturing. That's a great question. The standout moments for me were just growing up. I was always into drawing, and pencil drawing was a big thing for me, and started to get into more detailed drawings, having fun with it the artistic way. And slowly, it became obvious to me that some of the mechanical engineering stuff and the way that you could draw in 3D was the next wave of cool, fun drawing, but also getting into how we build things and how we manufacture things. Going from that creative side to an actual production mentality is really what manufacturing is about. Taking those ideas and making them practical, and then making them repeatable. So, yeah, I just kind of jumped into it from the CAD side. I guess that would be one of the big markers that brought me in, was drawing in CAD, drawing in 3D, doing a lot for the automotive and aerospace industry in that way, components, parts, different things, full assemblies of airplanes, pulling them up in giant programs like CATIA, being able to work with these big files and draw new things and existing things. And that's what brought me in. From there, it was the also metrology. That was the second part of my career: measurement, inspection, and reverse engineering. So that was another benchmark of, oh, wow, you could really fine tune things. And also found scanning at that time, surface scanning, being able to pull in information. You get point clouds, and a lot of that is now attributed, obviously, to 3D printing, taking files and putting them in a machine and printing them layer by layer, and now doing that for production in both metal and polymer, plastic. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the industry, and very happy to be here talking to you about that. But that's really what pulled me in, being excited about those things.
It's fantastic. And I do have some in depth questions coming up. But before we go in the in depth questions, can you give us a quick intro on who Adam is? What's your experience, your expertise, and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure, sounds good. Yeah. Again, Adam Penna. I have a long background in manufacturing. I started out on the CAD side, CAD engineering, getting into that side of it. Went through the metrology, like I said, reverse engineering, inspection, and all that good stuff. But then using that to get into the 3D side has really been where I've focused for, over a decade, probably close to 2 decades of doing the 3D side of things, and also working with printers, 3D printers, not just the desktop ones like I have behind me here, but a production printer. There's something different about that could repeatable, plastic and metal. I got to bring that up because a lot of people I even realize I talk today don't realize you could print metal.
Really?
And yeah, very precise. There's different technologies out there, but you can print metal in a precise powder. It's called powder laser powder bed fusion is actually one of the most precise ways of manufacturing in 3D with printing. And you could print in metal, and it could be this like the thickness of your hair, or like a third of the thickness of a hair in any direction for a certain volume. Like 3 meters or so, 3 feet or so. You could get very precise prints. So that's really kind of what fascinated me. I worked for a company called EOS for 5 years before the pandemic, and was even involved with their founder, and worked a lot with what's going on to build the industry, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's too expensive. You can do it other ways besides printing." And there's some truth to that, but there are applications growing more and more nowadays, that especially in aerospace and medical, that are just medical's life changing. Aerospace again, we can go further, farther, faster, less fuel, with a lot of the advancements that are going on with these different thrusters and you know all the chambers that push you out into space. The thrusting chambers that come off the back of a rocket. That's really kind of a new technology now that's made with 3D printing, where you could make cooling channels throughout the walls of something like that. And it's changing everything. So there's so many neat things happening with applications. However, it is a niche industry. It's a small part of manufacturing, growing bigger every day and finding new applications. A lot of people like to call it another tool in the toolbox, but yeah, manufacturing in general is really interesting. And now 3D printing is playing a place inside of production manufacturing. Really cool.
In your opinion, how did 3D printing change the industry?
Well, I saw it happen myself. Changing the industry, probably what most people know and see is the product. Excuse me, the prototype side of things. What's happening to design. And come up with things, and not throw away or waste so many things on building tools or molds and things like that. And using 3D printing to maybe make a mock-up of what you wanted to do or want to be, want to print, or actually just want to manufacture. It might be a part that's going to be manufactured differently, but you could quickly make a prototype inside of 3D printing. So you've seen that for a long time. Even some of the events out there were named because of the prototype industry, like Rapid's an annual event, one of the biggest 3D printing shows in North America right now. But that's called Rapid Prototyping. Now it's more production based, and all those shows are based around production, even with the old names that they have. And then there's new ones out there too, like Form Next from Europe is a big 3D printing show for production that's now pulling things over to the United States. So it's really about looking at where these things are going now, and seeing them used in a practical sense, but more to production, repeatability, quality. Those are things that weren't around back in the only prototype days. Now we're going to full production, and it's actually getting really, really interesting.
So it used to be that the 3D printing is more of the making the creative process faster and less hassle, but now they're trying to move into making it full production.
Both, yes, yes. It's still used for prototyping,
Yeah,
more than not, but also there are production parts that are being
yeah,
made through a lot of different companies that are doing that and using that. It's all about the design.
yeah.
If you're changing a design and making it better with 3D printing, because you're building something layer by layer, cross section by cross section, opposed to a big block of metal or plastic that you're, taking a tool and kind of carving away and making all those metal chips and things like that. That's how we currently build most things. When you're talking about 3D printing, it's layer by layer. So you're taking a file, cutting it up into different layers depending upon the machine, and then printing that one layer at a time. So you're adding layers, and that's where the term additive manufacturing comes from, opposed to subtractive manufacturing, which is a traditional manufacturing term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people are wondering why Adam has the Joe Rogan headphones, he is also a podcaster, and I'm glad that he's here. And by the way, can you talk to us about how podcast is treating you? What do you like about it? And just tell us more about it.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's obviously it's gained a lot of traction in the last handful of years. But yeah, it came out of nowhere for me. I started as a way to communicate with people. First coming out of the pandemic, and I wasn't even looking to do a pandemic. I mean, looking to do a podcast in the pandemic, but it just went that way. I had all the gear, like you're saying. I had headphones from music and things like that, and microphones, and just started talking to people, and the next thing I know, people were like, "Hey, you want to be on your show?" I was like, "I don't have a show, but I guess I could do this." And my daughter actually gave me the push. She was like, are you doing podcast, Papa?" And I was like, "Why?" She's like, "Oh, you got a really good voice for it." And I was like, "Oh, gosh, okay, well, thank you." But I haven't even started doing podcasts, and that's kind of was the push. I'm like, "Okay, I could do this if my daughter thinks I'm okay." Got to be okay. And yeah, just started doing that for a lot of different people who didn't have a voice during the lockdown, during the pandemic, when people weren't working or putting things out. I spent a lot of time highlighting our industry and really talking to people across the globe, even the CEOs, top engineers, just even newcomers to the industry, and even people in college and people thinking about printing, and just got a good swath of everything that's out there as far as what's happening in our industry, and it led to a lot of cool things. So podcasting itself got very interesting, talking to people, and just learning a lot more, and you could have a lot of good connections by doing it, obviously, but it's really a good conversation, education, and hopefully you could help highlight about what is actually happening in another person's life, which is what we're all going through as human beings. So I love it. I think it does take a lot more out of your day and your time than people think it does. There's a lot that goes into podcasting, as you know. So the pre and post production that happens with all the editing and all the preparation prior to, and then all the promotion afterwards, there's a lot that happens there. So it's been a really cool thing to learn, and also a great way of growing, being an influencer in the industry, and being known for talking to people about what's actually happening. So yeah, I think it's a very good mode of communication that's probably not going to go away anytime soon. I hope not. Talking and being able to relate with people is old as we are, So this is another way to do it, modern way to do it, that I think actually opens up a lot more of the conversation. So I love it.
And it does take a lot of work, yeah. I'm
Mm.
thinking about doing a daily podcast, but I'm just
Yeah.
imagining the daily toll that would put me on. Been putting it off.
Yeah, I
you
did
know
like one week for a long time, and that was
yeah.
more than enough.
Really,
You
how
got to
often are
find your pace.
you doing now?
Now I'm about ready to launch the new podcast. I took a little step back here through a little bit of changes right now,
Yeah,
but we have a big international trade show coming up in less than a month, and I'll be kicking off my new episodes then. I actually did another podcast for an
yeah,
organization called American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and that was on their additivemanufacturing.com website, which I ran for about 2 years. And so I've done different podcasts for organizations, for myself, but this one that I've had, it's been
yeah,
since 2020, and the all digital additive manufacturing podcast, and that's the one that I'm going to relaunching a new season soon, right here after the big trade show up in
yeah.
Chicago. It's 100,000 people, happens every 2 years. It's
Oh,
called the International Manufacturing Technology Show. So IMTS, and looking forward to being up there and doing that. I'm hosting the main stage for
yeah.
additive manufacturing, so I get to talk to all the people in our industry there, and that's a byproduct and benefit of doing these podcasts and doing things like this. So
Are
we're
you
really
are you
looking forward
planning
to that.
on doing a weekly episode?
I believe so. I believe that's at least the best way to do it. I think every other week is still a decent way, but the
Yeah,
whole thing is being consistent, right? Once
Yeah.
you have a consistency going, people know when they are going to be able to get a new episode. They know when they could listen. They fit it into their schedule. If you get inconsistent, then it gets harder to be on people's radar with your new episodes. So consistency is the key. So most likely, I'll probably start off bi-weekly and see how that goes. And then if I could pick up the steam, I will. But we all got to work and do different things. It's not the lockdown anymore. But at the same time, sometimes you get a lot of great ones, and I'll do 3 in a week or something like that just because it's great guests, going really smooth, and I'm enjoying it. So depends, but you got to be consistent on the way you put them out. So I'm gonna stick to at least every other week, but we'll see once it kicks off here, September 2024.
There's a lot of things that are changing in the manufacturing world. Especially because most of the innovations are in the aerospace side of things. And I think
Sure.
that actually kicks things up a notch on how fast innovation is going. Besides 3D printing, what other innovations do you think is the most interesting that came out this decade?
Wow, wow. There's a lot of good ones. Obviously, robotics is really taking off with what they do inside of manufacturing, and it's used pretty much everywhere. It's becoming part of every part of the production process, even inside of 3D printing. Something that helps move parts from one section to another. You have something you do after it comes out of the machine. A lot of times you have to clean it, or do if it's metal, you might be doing something else to it, like cutting it off a build plate or something like that. So there's processes, and robotics takes a lot of that. The automation side of it's big too. How can we automate that process? And 3D printing, just because of the way it's set up, it's ready for
Can you hear me?
you. I can't.
Uh,
So you cut out, but you're back. It didn't. It just said your host will be back. Nothing happened
yeah.
to the screen.
But I think we're
Oh,
back now. Oh, did you turn off your camera?
let me see. Oh,
Right. This is why I love doing recorded podcasts.
oh yeah, man. Believe me, it's happened to me. Yeah, I have a surge protector that, for some reason, likes to chime, and I can't figure out how to turn the chime off. There's always something. It's like, "Oh my gosh, please just let me get through without a whole bunch of, hiccups."
Yeah.
Hmm.
But feel free to jump back in.
Yeah, hold on a second. Where were we at? What was that last question?
Let me re-ask the question.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, yeah. With all
Uh,
the
i is,
change.
uh is it okay that your video isn't on? Is this just audio?
Oh,
Is that how this ends up? Or okay, there you are. Your video's back.
yeah. I think is it back on?
Yeah, you're back. You're back. Just for a second,
Awesome.
it wasn't.
With all the changes that is happening in the manufacturing side of things, especially in the aerospace industry, because it is a big part of it. I think aerospace industry makes innovation go 10 times faster.
Sure.
What other things do you see that are best innovations in the past decades besides 3D printing?
Yes, yes, that's what we were talking about a little bit more about the different things that apply to manufacturing in general. Some of the new things, 3D printing, of course, it's one side of it, a small side of manufacturing that's growing, but you see everything inside of automation. It's a big deal with robotics. I see a lot of robotics everywhere that are growing inside of processes that are making things more automated in the 3D printing industry. It's what happens before and after it's in the machine. You might have a robot moving things to different processes around the printer. Once it comes out of the printer, there's things that have to go on, like cleaning. Might be a metal build, so you might have to cut it off a plate. Things like that are called post processing. And that's done with a lot of robotics. That's the automation side of things. Another big word out there, one of the buzzwords, machine learning. What does that mean, right? I've even heard memes from some of the candidates talking about machine learning out there. But really, what's going on, it's like, hey, we all have all this data, right? And 3D printing is a big part of the digital world. That makes the future really cool. So you're seeing how we actually interface with data in a digital world, how you could do things you could automate processes with robots, with AI obviously helping with a lot of different tools, but that's looking at with machine learning, it's looking at what's been done before, what's been done, where the machines are, their temperatures, what they did the last time they made something like that, and how they can compensate. Also looking at design, in the beginning, you're looking at CAD, you're drawing or making parts or files. Now, a lot of times, with what's going on, you could take and run it through a program that will give you a simulation, and it will shoot out, hey, these are the different ways if you wanted to build this in a cast, or if you wanted to use traditional manufacturing, this is a part you could build. Or hey, if you're looking at doing in 3D printing, this is a part you could build. And what that looks like is maybe an optimized file because you don't have to build it the traditional way. So you might be able to remove some of the weight, use different materials. And these are things that are all great in a digital world. So I think the biggest change has been, coming from the old world of doing everything kind of with paper and by hand and not having these automated processes. You're seeing a lot of the digital stuff, including 3D printing, take a big leap forward because you could do things remotely. That's another thing, remote ways of interfacing with machines and controlling things. You could use, the automation side to set up those processes and make sure you're doing things in a production way and always upgrade those. And that's where you see a lot of even robotics coming in because that's a huge upgrade to the assembly lines of a lot of production. And it fits right in for 3D printing and additive manufacturing. Yeah, so it's like those kind of jumps. You've seen a lot of great things in the last few years, I guess you could say, with the automation and the digital side of this world.
With all the automations and the robotics that are being integrated with these companies all the time, do you think there's a risk, potential loss of jobs for a lot of people, especially because if I'm a company, instead of growing by hiring, I would just grow by adding more machines? Do you think there's a risk on that?
Yes and no. A lot of these production machines, especially at this point, that's kind of the dream is to have the what do you call it? The facility where lights off, it's all running by itself. You don't have to have all the human interface in there. However, there's everything that happens, the reality of parts maybe getting held up or being stuck or some kind of human interface that has to happen to the maintenance of these machines, everything, the engineering of all the actual parts that are being built and how they're being changed and made for 3D printing to be made better. There's a lot of the new side of the jobs that are being made, but because it's all ever since existence, it's been as soon as you figure out a better way to do something, everybody's afraid of losing their jobs. However, there's always seems to be a way that counters with a new industry that it makes of new positions you weren't thinking of before. So seeing a lot of that. Obviously, there's a lot of fear. I think now, especially with the AI out there, you hear it a lot more. It's taking over people's jobs. Yes and no. There's just so many things that you have to adapt. You have to adapt. You have to change. You have to be ready for change. And if you're stuck in doing things one way, you're in a lot of trouble, because things are going to change. Your competition's going to get something that's different than your one way of doing it. It might be automating the process. It might be doing it in 3D printing instead of manufacturing it the traditional way. Whatever that competitive edge is, that's what actually you have to start to be nimble and be open to is seeing those things and how they could work for your particular application, your particular company, industry, whatever it is. So it's just like everything else. Change is inevitable. You have to actually you have to plan for it. You have to put it in your plan or your business plan of looking at things that actually improve the company. And a lot of what we talked about is part of that. So there's the double side of it. There are the jobs that are going to go away from some automation and things like that, but there's also the other sides of now what does that create with maintenance, with everything else that goes along with, working inside of manufacturing. So we're still valuable out there as human beings. I don't see that going away anytime soon.
What I like about AI compared to machines, when they were first invented, most of the time machines they were only afforded by the big companies. Unlike AI, you can be a one person show and you can have AI tools on your back to assist you.
Sure.
So basically levels a playing field.
It does, and I know even little things we've talked about with podcasting. There's been a lot of advancements that help with your editing, help with your even setup for any kind of writing you have to do for description and intro. So that's great. Those are tools that you could outsource and do outsource, but at the same time, now you're able to do them a lot quicker. set things up, get more podcasts out there. It's you get more work. You can talk to more people, do more podcasts because you're not worried about all this, editing, setup, description stuff. You have to do some tweaks, here and there, but you don't have to worry about the big side of it, which is coming up with all of it yourself. It takes a lot to do all that. So I'm happy to see those kind of changes. They really help your daily routine and automating and making AI a friendly use instead of, oh boy, I wonder what's this going to do. It's actually something that's applicable to what you're doing today. That's nice.
Media plays a big role these days. How
Yeah.
do you think good media content can drive business in manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a challenge, isn't it? Because it's like, as everyone talks about, and then I know you're involved in this too. It's like, hey, what sort of leads are we getting? What ROI are we getting from this investment? Where is this going to get us, and where is it going to show up on that bottom line? And a lot of it is, it's a gray area, because it's you're doing a lot of promotion, especially if you're doing a lot of video and audio and things like that that have to be placed inside of why you're doing it. So it's working with those marketing teams and sales teams to come up with this is the right way to actually set up those kind of programs that you're going to get the leads from. Maybe it's a webinar or a could be a paid conversation that's a video interview that gets ideas across, but that's actually put out there to collect leads, because it's actually answering a specific question that's out there. So you have to identify those things inside of your company, and it's a lot of there's a lot of the same things, but there's everyone's got to be tweaked because we're all have unique situations of how we address the market. But it's those things that are actually put in place now that are doing a lot of good for companies. Having them talk, having them interviewed on different podcasts where it's not in house. It's a third party hosting things and bringing light to things without them talking about themselves. So there's a lot of good in that. It's just also being able to prove out what benefit you're having here. Especially when you're doing things specifically for a company like raising awareness, trying to actually get the leads for a certain product or a certain industry you're working with. You have to actually look at that focus and have a plan going into what you're doing to measure those results. And as you know, things don't work, and you could tweak and change, but you have to measure those results, and that's a big part of that digital world. We could do that now and measure who's clicking where, what sort of looks or interest a video gets, or what conversation is more important than other conversations. You can measure that and adjust for it as you go. So that's a great thing to look at as far as data is concerned. There's always data out there.
Yeah, for a podcast, I think the main benefit for a company is it humanizes your brand. I
Sure.
don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is one of the biggest advantage. What's the biggest challenge that you've had with connecting within the manufacturing community, especially because you're mainly media?
What's the biggest challenge connecting
Yeah. Yeah.
with?
Did you have any challenge on, being connected with the manufacturing community?
Um, luckily, especially in the manufacturing community, in additive manufacturing, there are a lot of it's a smaller industry, so it's like people know each other. You can get connected at a lot of these events. There's user groups. There's something called a mug, which is the Additive Manufacturers Users Group, and that's an annual thing. So there's ways to tap into your market by becoming part of these organizations and groups and meeting at different events. A lot of online virtual events also that you can get involved in. Groups like Women in 3D Printing is something that has been new over the last 8 years. It's been building and growing, and they've had their own events, so you could network inside of there as a female in the industry or as a male, also just supporting what's going on. So I think it's knowing the networking that's on there and getting involved, just like anything else, networking inside of what your industry is doing. It's not hard. It just takes that action of doing it, being present, going, talking to people, having an agenda of who you want to talk to when you go to a certain event. Like, hey, the head of GE is going to be there talking about this. I want to make sure I, stop by and talk to whatever it is. You have to make sure you schedule those things out so you have the most productive use of your time when you're networking. Because things don't happen too quickly, but if you take the right approach with planning, you could get things done a lot better that way.
What are the major challenges and opportunities that you see in manufacturing right now?
Challenges and opportunities. Challenges are constant. I could go down the list of different sides of manufacturing. I think the biggest thing is there's always going to be the new way of doing things, the better way of doing things. But as far as companies are concerned, they have already proven processes in place that they use. So the challenge across the board is really getting people to listen. Um, but you do that by listening to them. What is their actual issue that is bothering them that you might be able to help as a service provider, no matter who you are. So it's knowing, I guess, your target market and then going after them appropriately and offering the solutions that help them. But that's a challenge. It's not easy. There's budgets out there. You got the people that already are doing things and are like, no, we're okay. We've been doing this for 20 years. It works. Well, no matter if you can speed that up and save them money, they hear that every day. So it's being able to get that trust and also show the solution in a proper way. So I think just building those relationships and being able to identify and what your solution can do for their problem, that's always the biggest challenge. Once you're in that, it's good. The other side, you said challenges, and what was the other side of the question?
Opportunities that you see. Yeah,
Opportunities.
it's
Yes.
a lot of
Wow.
them. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about a lot of them, right? And even the bigger buzzwords you hear out there, like sustainability, those kind of things, the ability to automate a lot of your processes. Those are things that are opportunities right now for a lot of people. When you get into that mode of identifying, okay, your company is now has a new sustainability model they want to follow. Did you know inside of 3D printing, this material can be made custom to your specific needs that could make it more sustainable than using your current materials you're using to build your whatever it is, your widget. Those kind of things are all over the place. And it's a reality in the digital world with 3D printing. There's a lot of that's kind of an opportunity out there to get with people and actually sit with them and understand what their issues are. Yeah, other opportunities I think out there, in general, I think there's a lot of happening with content and the way it's driven in social media. So that's a big one. I think we've all like been on LinkedIn and we know the impact of social media in general. There's a lot going on with reels now and shorts because people have a short attention span. And so if you could get something very educational in one of these reels, you have an opportunity there to get in front of a lot of people that now are scrolling or doom scrolling or happy scrolling or whatever you want to call it. So there's all these different tools to be used. There's different opportunities out there to grab attention. People want leads. They want the right type of leads. They want, focused inside of their particular industry or application. And that is tough. And it's like going out there and trying things, seeing what works and doesn't work, and readjusting. We talked a bit about that process. That's an ongoing thing. But that's a great opportunity out there because of all this new technology we have, the AI tools that we were talking about, and all the normal tools that are out there that actually help people along the way get better and actually make it a process that fits for their particular environment. But yeah, always good challenges and opportunities. They are there to be taken
Yeah.
at all times. Yeah.
Sustainability is a big concern, and a lot of industries, even the different industries that I've talked with, almost all of them are going for the sustainability side of things. So I really appreciate that. That's an amazing, concern because we do only have one planet.
That's true. We do,
Yeah.
and it is a big deal. A lot of the materials that are constantly, being used to manufacture have issues, cause problems for the environment. With 3D printing, you have the ability to mix materials because you could work with alloys and come up with your own material that can be more sustainable and stronger, lighter. All the things that you're doing to waste energy too can be reduced because you might not need all that material, which could lightweight things inside of your applications, and there you go. You have a bottom line of how you're being sustainable. You're not wasting as much fuel, you're not wasting as much material, and you could actually account for it and show that. So yeah, that's a really good thing too.
Personally, what industries do you see most interesting, especially on the manufacturing side of things that they're doing?
Yeah, the two big ones that we've talked about a little bit that stand out are aerospace and medical. The aerospace and medical field are driving a lot of research and development and pushing the boundaries of what can be done. Those applications inside of medical are changing lives and saving lives. There's polymer things that are being made, plastic things that are like a stents or that are put in tracheas that is taking a scan of an infant, their whole trachea, and then building a perfect stent for inside of them to hold all their airflow open so they can continue to breathe. And that's something that can be, again, biodegradable, absorb in the body from the material you make that you print, but it's custom made to that individual infant. And that's a real thing that's happening that's saving lives. It's beautiful. You couldn't do that before. It's personalized for that individual's, esophagus and fits perfectly and holds things open enough to save lives. So there's beautiful things like that. And the metal side too, you're seeing personalized. It's called osseo integration, bone integration. So you can scan your own bone density and replicate that inside of a print, so that when they're putting like say in your back, you're getting a disc replaced or something like that, you get something that is printed with the same bone structure inside of the middle of it. I had some of those examples. I can show you too, but yeah, it's great. So it's mimicking what's happening in your own body. That therefore, when you put it in the body, it accepts it a lot more than it does. You know, implant A, B, or C. To fit into your body. What about one that's personally made for you with your exact bone structure? That's something that is just mind blowing, but it's a reality. And then in aerospace, we talked a bit about that, but there's everything that's going into outer space. All these international space stations, some of the smaller payloads. You could build all these big thruster rocket chambers. That where all the where all the burning comes out of the back end. As you're seeing these rockets go up in space. Well, some of those can be built inside of 3D printing and have all the cooling channels that are going throughout the walls, so you have a cooling of all the heat that's coming out of the rockets, and you can go further, faster, longer, saving fuel. It's just amazing. You can't do that with any other process. And that's really the crux of a lot of 3D printing, because it is expensive. It's coming down in price, but it's small batch units as opposed to millions and millions of print. You want to do something that's a little bit smaller, maybe 1,000 or so. You could do things, with aerospace that happens that you can't do with any other industry. That's just amazing like that. You can't take a drill and drill a bunch of cooling channels inside of a cone. You can't do that. You could just maybe push some holes in it, but you can't actually have something where you could pump fluid throughout a thin wall. It's like, wow, that concept just blows me away. But yeah, it's stuff like that, light weighting, making things not as bulky, because you could take a look at it and make it fit perfectly inside of the application by reducing material in the right places in simulation, and you can see where it's good and bad inside of a current product. So you go look through like a catalog of your automobile or your airplane, and you look at parts that can now be changed and made better by 3D printing. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's kind of revolutionizing. If you want to check that out there's something called Zinger Vehicles also that's doing something with automobiles as far as fully 3D printing the fastest cars on Earth. People like Ferrari and Bugatti are buying parts from them now, incorporating them into their vehicles, because Kevin Zinger has proven with his vehicle that he's taken out on all the Indy racetracks, and he's breaking every record across the world with a 3D printed car. And it's not about the car, actually. He's just highlighting the process of engineering now in the digital world and what you could actually produce. So he's reinventing the assembly line basically by assembling things and gluing them together with robots and automation, instead of having them all come down the assembly line and come together. Pretty neat, pretty out there, but that stuff is Divergent Technologies. That's the name of the company that do it. Kevin Zinger is the one who is making those vehicles. So there's a lot of interesting applications like that you could really check out and see that are doing major changes to the way we build things and manufacture things.
The fact that you can create custom parts that would normally take you months because you need to create the machinery about it. That speeds things up genuinely.
Big time. You don't think about also the tooling. The tooling is how you hold this part in that you're making. You got
Yeah,
to have a jig set up and different pieces that hold it in. And those things, making those tools, you could wait a month or 2 months to have
yeah,
those tools made, or you could print it
really.
out, make it on the spot. And it's speeding things up that much more, and people are doing
Yeah,
that every day now that are incorporating those kind of methods into their businesses. So yeah.
that's amazing. And do you personally plan on going back to manufacturing?
I've never left manufacturing, but yeah, I don't. It's been a
Yeah,
while. I have a lot of things that have happened on the media side ever since 2000. That was been inside of engineering, sales, marketing. I've been across the board inside of manufacturing, even customer support, application support. I've done it all inside of the engineering room, CAD room. I've moved through all of manufacturing in my career and continue to do a lot of things and projects with different manufacturing companies on that side. So, yes, I guess to answer your question, yes, I don't ever see myself not being involved with manufacturing in some way.
but what role did you enjoy the most?
Ooh, what role did I enjoy the most? Oh, that's so hard because it's like every time you look back, everything looks better when you look back. And while you're doing it, it's always very hard. I've been thinking lately about my early jobs and how finally I love my early jobs of working with my hands. I used to work I was an apprentice inside of a wood shop from 17 to 23, where I've got to, sandblast and paint and really just make things. And I really miss that. I've been doing a lot of that in my own personal space now because that's something I enjoy a lot. Going, picking, smelling fresh wood out there at the lumber yard and picking your own pieces to make something. There's something about that. So that part of my career I love, I think. And I'd love to have that back in my life, and I'm slowly getting back there. All the other stuff. I think it's been even understanding when I started understanding what metal 3D printing is recently, it blew my mind. And I think that's why I'm so addicted to talking about it and got so involved. I worked for EOS, one of the biggest precision metal 3D printing companies. They're a private company, but they have the most installations as far as precision metal printing goes. And they do plastic too, and they use a powder and a laser to build. So it's a very, very precise way of building and 3D printing with layer by layer. You're melting, one layer of powder and
Yeah,
you're building this beautiful, beautiful part. So that really, I think, is where I drank the Kool-Aid. As soon as
yeah,
I saw what you could do with metal 3D printing, all of the stuff that I used to do when I started my career,
yeah,
when I would design, people would say, "Ooh, that's not going to fit because of this part or that part," or "Ooh, you can't build that because you can't cut like that, even though it looks nice and you built this nice, it's not going to be able to be manufactured." Well, now I'm seeing, a lot of these parts that I imagine could be made can be made with 3D printing because you don't have those kind of constraints. There's different constraints, but you could get a lot of really unique things done as far as manufacturing when you're doing it layer by layer that accurately. So that to me really changed my perspective on printing. And it was I got a big shout out to EOS and Hans Longer, who was one of actually my first
yeah,
podcast interviews when I worked for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. But he's the one that really said, "Hey, this is a production process, and I'm going to develop that production process." And he's done that. So it's really cool to see those things come to fruition.
yeah. Is it like the metal 3D printing? Is it like they have this powdered metal and they just melt it layer by layer?
Yeah, the powder, there has like a sweeping blade that kind of
Yeah,
pushes the powder over the top of what's called a build plate,
yeah,
and the build plate is that bottom area that you're actually building in. It's like the volume, the build volume that you have. So they have something like a blade that pushes that small thin layer over the top of the plate, and then that laser burns the first pattern of your part that you've made, and that part's kind of sliced into those small layers depending upon the accuracy of the printers, how many very small slices it makes, and then it prints that. And once it prints the first layer, the build plate drops down, and again pushes over the same amount over the top of the part that it just melted, and then the next, it melts the next layer on top of the current layer. So it's actually a lot of science because you have to think, okay, how hot does my laser have to be in this spot not to mess up what I've already melted below it? You know, it's got a lot of cooling, timing, how where it hits, where the laser hits and comes back to. Very precise algorithms. That's all done inside of software now. That has really sped up how you can build these parts because layer by layer, it's dropping down, throwing powder, dropping down. So it's all built inside this powder chamber below, and then you remove all the powder when it's done, and you have this beautiful part sitting there. So that to me is like, the power of 3D printing layer by layer. You're doing something that is so accurate that you can come up with a new design that's going to revolutionize the world. So really, really
Man,
neat to see that.
that's very
Yeah.
interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up. You
Yeah.
know, uh, when the time comes that we can make arms that are made of metal and we can replace our body parts, I will get a metal arm.
Dude, I think they got one for you. If you check out the emojis, type in an arm and it's got like a metal arm, like already like a robotic arm, man. It's
Imagine
already,
how cool that would
people are
be, man.
thinking about getting those going already. We could all be
Yeah.
droids out there,
You
cyborgs.
can use it as a shield from
Yeah,
bullets.
totally. I mean, hey, whatever works works.
But any advice on anyone who's looking to enter the manufacturing field?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great organizations out there. There's the Society for Manufacturing Engineers, SME. There's the American Society for Mechanical Engineers, ASME. It's good to get involved with these groups. They have a lot of events, a lot of trade shows, a lot of support, a lot of education, a lot of networking that can be done there. And again, the user groups that are out there, there's CAD user groups, there's machining users groups, there's, like I said, additive manufacturing user groups. Those user groups are an important place where you're going to meet a lot of the people you work with throughout your career. So yeah, also reach out. It's hard to do anything if you think, oh, I don't know anybody, or I'm not that experienced. And some people, especially the new generation, has an issue with communicating. It's like, sometimes an email or a text isn't enough, and you got to keep reaching out multiple times to get a hold of somebody. But that's okay. That's part of what we all go through. And just know that everyone started out and, from not knowing, and everyone doesn't know everything. So we're all learning at the same time. So no questions are dumb, especially when you're starting out somewhere. You need to ask those questions. You need to reach out, and it's not easy to do, but there's stuff online, networking with people. There's those live events you can go to. So I would start there. A lot of live events, you can go there being an unknown, and they'll welcome you and introduce you to everybody very quickly. So take that step and reach out and do that. I think that's an important part of growing is networking and being able to reach out and ask for how do I do this, or how do I get involved, or what can I do? And you'll get that answer. It's a great way to start out.
And I don't think people understand this enough. People, especially experienced one, they love to be regarded as mentors. So,
Sure.
yeah,
Big time. Yeah, that's a part of giving back. You get
yeah,
something out of giving back. So don't think that someone's unapproachable. And if they are, find another person, man. They might be just going through a bad day, but there's plenty
yeah.
of people that'll talk to you out there.
Awesome. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, do you have any advice on life?
Wow, advice on life. Wake up and keep going. There's good times and bad times. We all go through a lot of struggles in our lives. It's good to be networked in, and if you have your own even beliefs in this world, it's good to have a base that you could return to. I think advice in general is to realize we're all here right now together, and it's a blessing to be here because someday we won't be. So reach out and take advantage of the time you have here, and it's okay when you go through hard times. A lot of people get ashamed or go through things or difficult times, but the bottom line is to get through those times. It's okay to feel hurt or go through things for a while, but then you got to stand up and move on. And we all have sometimes a hard time with that. So I just say, just realize it's not only you that is going through things, and there are people out there that you could reach out to. So Thank God, even during that lockdown period of life, we have the internet and the things that are able to connect us. If you don't have that, go talk to somebody. You can even go to your public libraries and get online nowadays. There's so many ways to interact and get out there. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea to have your core unit of people that you divulge them information to and talk to, and just take that one moment at a time, and realize a lot of things are issues you're going through are just moments. I'll be the other moments where there's wonderful times and there's things that aren't so frustrating, but that part of life is both sides, enjoying things when they're great and also going through some times when things aren't so great. It's going to change. That's part of life. And that's it. I try to look at the gratitude a lot of times and things, and I get mad and I'm not grateful a lot of times because I am human. But then there's times where I have to switch on and look at the little things I have in life and just be grateful for being here today and having the things I have and being able to talk to people like you. So I think gratitude is the best attitude, but sometimes it takes a while to get to gratitude. I know that. Uh, yeah, I wish.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your stand on work-life balance?
Work-life balance, in
Yeah,
general, it depends on where you are in life,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of time when you're younger, especially where you have the ability to spend a lot of time doing things because you don't have that many responsibilities in life, but with a family, when things start growing, when you have, for your friends or you just have your own personal time, it's very important, because you could just run yourself dry, with work, 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 work. You have to have something to blow off steam. You have to have something to have your own escape or different things you do that are healthy for you. That work balance thing is a big deal. It used to not be probably about 15 years ago. I was just like, well, I work whenever I want. I have a daughter now. I have friends. I enjoy doing things, family I want to see, and if I don't, it takes away from my work. It really does. So that balance is very important. So don't just be a workaholic. Know when to have your limits and actually do things that feed your soul, feed your mind. Outside of the electronic world and in the real world, there's a lot to look at and enjoy out there in life.
Fantastic. Where can people find you?
Yeah, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is Adam J Penna. J is my middle initial, and yeah, you could check me out there, and also on YouTube. All Digital AM, All Digital Additive Manufacturing is the podcast, and yeah, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Happy to talk with you.
Fantastic. And anyone, all digital AM, it's Adam as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
an
it's an
acronym.
acronym for Adam. Yeah, that's my own acronym. All Digital AM. There you go.
So it's clever. I just wanted to find the best keyword for my podcast, so I made it the new world.
Hey,
Anyway,
there you go. That's a good one, man. I like it. You're doing a
anyways,
good job. Yeah.
thank you for joining us on the New World podcast. And again, thank you.
They can jump on.
That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.